Good morning, friends. We're continuing with our roadmap for right living based on the 52 qualities Swamiji describes in this wonderful little book, Affirmations for Self-Healing. Let's begin with a prayer. Heavenly Father, Divine Mother, Friend, Beloved God, Jesus Christ, Babaji Krishna, Lahiri Mahashaya, Swami Sri Yukteswar, Beloved Master Paramahansa Yogananda, Saints of all religions, Friend and Guide Swami Kriyananda, humbly we bow to all. Help us to feel your guiding presence, that everything we do will be inspired from the superconscious, that we may act in this world in constant remembrance that we are your children, your emissaries, your instruments in this world. Om. Peace. Amen. We are now on quality number 6, which is the quality of work. Very interesting. So first I'll read he has 3 paragraphs describing this. I'll read all the way through, and then I'll spend time line by line. Work should be done with a creative attitude, never for the sake of selfish gain, but for the chance it gives us to help create a better world. Those who work with the thought of pay live in the future. They lose the habit of living here and now, where alone true happiness can be found. Work should always be done as well as possible, not out of self-conceit, but in gratitude for the free gift of life, of sunshine, of water, of air, and in gratitude simply for our God-given power to be useful to our fellow man. And the affirmation, I will do my work thinking of Thee, Lord. I offer to Thee the very best that is in me. And the prayer, Beloved Lord, who so wonderfully created the high snowy mountains, the bounding rivers, the colorful, fragrant flowers, the vast, heaving oceans, and the distant, glittering stars, manifest through me thy perfect joy. Well, that's all pretty splendid, isn't it? Let's take it apart now and learn more. You can always depend on Swamiji to pick something up from the highest and often the unexpected or unconsidered thread that changes the whole perspective. So he starts by saying work should be done with a creative attitude. And then he parallels that with never for the sake of selfish gain, but for the chance it gives us to help create a better world. So he has the word creative and create in there in regard to work, and he posits that against selfishness, selfish gain, versus creating a better world. You know, it's a distressing fact of life in this world that we can't live without working. And I'm not just speaking of the fact that we grow restless and have an inner desire to do something meaningful. It's also the fact that the way this world is constructed, we need money to live and we have to work to get money. I mean, almost everyone. Some people are born into wealth and work is never required of them, but that does not necessarily make for a better life. In fact, often people are ruined by the fact that they're never required to work. And as a consequence, well, I have seen the unfortunate consequences from time to time. whenever things get difficult or challenging, they just use their money to move on to another alternative. And it does not necessarily build character. Master spoke quite strongly, saying that you don't do your children a favor when you will them too much money. So it's something to think about. Most of us don't have that issue, but nonetheless, it's still something there. The rest of us have to find a way to support ourselves through some kind of work. And that work has to give us an energy exchange sufficient for us to be able to maintain ourselves, to house and feed and clothe and do all the things that are necessary to keep life going on this material plane of consciousness. So it's easy to think of our work as just something that we do for money. But Swami says a little bit later, if you work only for money, you're always living in the future. I have to get this out of the way so that I can get money so that I can then do what I want. Whereas if you work with a creative attitude to help make a better world, then you can see that everything you're doing has a purpose, and that purpose is in itself what you're doing. It's not just the pay that you get for it. Now, some of us have the karma to have been able to integrate, as Master put it, home, job, and church in one place. My enormous dilemma when I was younger, before I met Swamiji, was the concept of meaningful work. And I definitely recognize in the world that we're living in now, meaningful work is a very serious issue. When we first moved from Ananda village to take responsibility for Ananda's work in this Silicon Valley area, those of us who came from the village, our thought was what we needed was a community. And it was a very interesting learning for us as we developed a congregation of indigenous people who were already here and established. I don't mean indigenous in the way that's normally used. I'm using it humorously, meaning people who were in residence when we arrived from Ananda village. And when we started talking to them about the benefits of having a community and what a good idea it was to make a community, almost no one was interested. People had carefully worked out their own little secure places to live, and even if they were just an apartment that in and of itself did not seem so inspiring, nonetheless they were protective of whatever personal environment they had created. And we did, in fact, have established a community, but we had to do it with those of us who knew that it was going to be beneficial and then inspire others to join us after we got the ball rolling, so to speak. But everybody wanted us to create meaningful work for them. I mean, there was hardly a person who didn't hope that we'd start some kind of enterprises that would keep them at the same or close to the same economic conditions. They weren't looking to sacrifice their financial security for the sake of meaningful work, but they hoped we could create meaningful work that they wouldn't have to sacrifice their security for. It was very informative at the time, and also a tremendous challenge, which I've never myself been able to find a way to resolve, which is to be able to create financially remunerative jobs for people. We've done a few. We have a staff, we have a school staff, we have a Sangha staff, we have a school staff, we have a community staff, we have a farm. So there are positions. We have East-West bookshop, but not on the scale that people asked us to do. And it was very hard on my heart when I realized that, because I really wanted to help people and I really wanted to make a better world for them. But I understood it because it was the very dilemma that drove me to Ananda in the first place, was the desire to do something meaningful. Now we come back. Swami says work should be done with a creative attitude. And so what is a creative attitude? Creative attitude is to try always to make it fresh and to make it new. Now that doesn't mean, don't misunderstand, that means that you have to do it differently than it's been done before. It means that you have to yourself have a creative attitude toward what you're doing. A sense of this is a new day, a new moment, a new opportunity. I can always, I can approach this with fresh energy rather than approach this with a sense of staleness and dullness and resentment. I can always be grateful. I can find ways to find gratitude in whatever I'm being asked to do. And I can always ask, is there a way to do this better? And if it can be done better in and of itself, or if it can be done better because I have better energy that I bring to this. I bring fresher energy, new energy, giving energy. Now, a great deal of work in the world, especially these days, is simply not interesting. I have to say, it used to be worse when we didn't have machinery, we didn't have electricity, and all work was manual labor. And then it was sometimes just backbreaking, boring and backbreaking. Now we often have much more stimulating environments and much more fundamentally interesting things to do. But not everybody is gifted karmically or with the ability to do something that is in itself wonderful. So we have to think in terms of how can we make what we do wonderful. And this is where the creative attitude comes in. We're helping our co-workers. And the same prayer that helps us in all circumstances is the one to use here too. How can I serve? How can I serve if I'm on a factory assembly line? How can I serve the people who are sitting next to me? How can I serve by making this widget, the best widget that it can be, and imbuing it with positive energy so it will go forth and, and spread joy wherever it goes? How can I serve the people who I work for? And sometimes your environment is supportive of this, and sometimes it's neutral, and sometimes it makes things difficult. That's why the creative attitude is always needed. To be able to think, is there some new energy that I can bring to this situation? And of course, every day is a new day. So one can always bring new energy, and every job that I've ever known about or done has its tedium. It just has its part where it's just nothing but tedious. Some aspect of it has to be done that is not in itself stimulating or exciting. So the challenge to us as workers is to accept with gratitude what God gives us and make the best of it. Or we're working for the sake of our families, we're working to care for others. So work should always be done with a creative attitude, never for the sake of selfish gain, but for the chance it gives us to help create a better world. All true innovators and all true happy people are always thinking about how can I serve? How can I use this to help create a better world? If we're caught in a circumstance where we really feel morally compromised by the work we're doing, that's a very challenging situation. And one should pray to be released from such a situation. I remember when Haridas, who's a founding member of Ananda, was helping to establish a community in Sacramento, California. Excuse me for a moment. Helping to establish a community for Ananda in Sacramento. And there simply wasn't enough income from the Ananda project itself to support him. And he had to take some kind of a job. And he didn't have a highly developed set of skills, so it was a serviceful job of some kind, but he was just helping It might have been construction or manufacturing, I don't remember. And he became aware that the man he was working for sometimes padded the bills. And he became aware of the fact that sooner or later his boss was going to ask him to do something that wasn't quite honest. And he thought about it for a long time. And finally, when the day came, he was very worried about it because he wanted to keep the job for other reasons. But when the man finally asked him to do something that wasn't quite honest, he just simply said, "Oh, I can't do that." And that was the beginning, the end, and the middle of the whole story. It was never raised again. He just simply refused, and in that way was able to continue doing what he was doing. We have to have the courage of our convictions, even if those convictions may be challenged by circumstance. And always thinking, how can I create a better world? I also want to say, too often when we try to think about creating a better world, we think we're going to make some big invention, we're going to start some international nonprofit, we're going to innovate the way, people are treated in some major sector. Yes, of course. I mean, all of those are ideals that we might aspire to. But we also have to work in a practical way right where we stand. If we're crabby and judgmental and resentful, and the energy that we put out is crabby, unhappy, and resentful, we are creating bad vibes in the world. If we're cheerful, if we're cooperative, if we bring our faith in God to the situation, even if we never speak about it, if we see the divine present in others, and all of these qualities, it's the vibrations of our consciousness that really create a better world. There's a wonderful story that is in, I think it's in the book Swami Kriyananda's We Have Known Him. And it was told to me by a woman named Vairagi. She died a number of years ago of cancer. And at that time she was living in the ashram house that Ananda had in San Francisco. And one of the enterprises of that ashram house was a bookstore and cafe. And the bookstore and cafe was some miles from where the ashram was. And Vairagi didn't have a car. It wasn't necessary to have a car in the city. Others in the ashram had cars. And she worked at the bookstore and cafe, and her job ended up being the closing shift. And the store stayed open in the evenings, and it was about 10 o'clock when she would close the store down. And then she would have to take public transportation back to the ashram. There was a good bus. It wasn't a difficulty, but it was somewhat late at night. And it went through a district in San Francisco, which was rougher than the one she lived in or where the store was, but the bus route went through it. And often, especially late at night, some somewhat rowdy characters would get on and off the bus. And she found herself being a little frightened about being on that bus at night. And she brought the subject up to Swami Kriyananda because, of course, it was a question of her welfare. And so there was some discussion about whether or not there was anyone else who could take that shift, whether there was any other practical way to get back and forth from her job. And together they decided that no, it was the right shift for her, and it was the only way to travel. And she wasn't in real danger, so it wasn't that. It was just that she was nervous. And Swami suggested that what she should do when she was on that bus is that she should pick someone on the bus and spend the bus ride praying for them. Just asking Divine Mother to fill them with light, to help them learn the lessons that they might need to learn, to fulfill their higher destiny, to be uplifted, whatever intuitively would occur to her. And then if that person got off the bus, then choose someone else who was on the bus to pray for them. And Vairagi said as soon as she started doing that, first of all nervousness went away from her because she was now sitting on the bus in the company of the divine, and also because her sympathy, she was now reaching out sympathetically to people around her instead of holding herself tight and separating herself and being afraid of the people around her. She began to feel, instead of how they threatened her, she began to feel how much love there is between people and how much love there can be. And she said in a very short period of time, her bus rides to and from work, which had been a source of anxiety for her, became her favorite part of the day. Now, praying for people is one of the most powerful ways that you can turn any situation into a creative and positive experience. Or if that aspect doesn't always work for you, you can do japa. Japa is the inward repetition of the name of God. And you can recite a mantra, you can recite a prayer, you can inwardly sing some of Yogananda's chants. And if you don't have your own prayers, you can memorize a prayer from Whispers from Eternity or another source, or a prayer from this book, or you can do affirmations. And that's one of the many things that this book offers is affirmations. So that even if what you're actually doing, I mean, now this is presuming that the work you're doing isn't mentally taxing. If it's somewhat repetitive and doesn't require your full attention, you pray for the people around you, you pray for the people who will be the ultimate recipients of what it is that you're manufacturing. And all of a sudden, by the use of a creative attitude, and a creative attitude says, I don't just take things as they appear to be, I realize that I can create, I can make a new reality by the right application of my own energy. And if that creative energy is that I'm here at work because I need the income to be able to support the rest of my life, but why should I cease to be an uplifted person with a generous attitude toward life merely because my work itself does not directly relate to those ideals? So let it relate through my consciousness. Let me use this time to serve others and to draw closer to God. And then I'm not just working for selfish gain. During the time I'm here, I'm trying to think, how can I give? How can I serve? Those who work with the thought of pay live in the future. It's just a very interesting way to think about it, because what I'm doing now is not meaningful to me. The only thing that's meaningful is when I get the money, and then something else can happen. And he says, they lose the habit of living here and now. And that is really where the great danger comes. Because the problem is, you see, the future never comes. Because when the future arrives, it's the present. It's now. So when our mindset is always that I can just sort of go through like an automaton through the present, because in the future is when positive things will come to me, after work, on the weekend, when so-and-so happens, then I will be happy. But that becomes a mindset. And we imagine that we'll shift it when circumstances have changed. But the fact is, all we ever have is our inner consciousness. And if our inner consciousness is always looking to the future instead of living in the present, when the future comes and it is the present, we're still looking toward the future. I remember when I was very first learning about self-realization, I was 19 or 20 years old, and I tended to be impatient. I tend to do things quickly anyway, even without impatience. I just move fast. But at that time especially, I tended to be absent in the present, and always just my mind would be wandering off to something else that was going to happen. And that would often make me impatient because I wasn't concentrating, so I felt restless. And I just wanted to get this done so I could go on And I was in such a situation, I was actually washing dishes, trying to get them finished so I could go do something else. And an inward voice spoke to me in a slightly sarcastic tone. "What's your hurry, honey? It's just one damn thing after another." That was exactly what the voice said to me. But it really caught my attention, because what am I in a what am I in a hurry for? I mean, it's something else is going to happen. I'm going to have to do that. And if I'm impatient now and impatient then and impatient then and impatient then, when does it stop? And that means I'm always at war. I'm always in a state of resistance to whatever is in front of me. And it doesn't necessarily get done faster. In fact, generally, it gets done less fast if we're impatient to finish it, because we try to cut corners and we're not paying attention and our mind is somewhere else. And from that, I began, and of course it's been a lifelong practice, to just be here now. That was that wonderful book written by Baba Ram Dass, Be Here Now. Those 3 words, where else are you ever going to be except right where you are now? And so if we practice just giving our full attention to whatever's in front of us and surrendering to the requirements of the moment, that very act of surrendering and concentrating ironically, paradoxically, gives us that sense of fulfillment and happiness that we imagine is going to come only later. And it becomes a habit also to, with a creative attitude, working for the good of the world, not just for selfish reasons, we begin to enjoy. And then the impatience to be somewhere else leaves of its own accord, and we find ourselves at rest. And when our energy is not at war with itself, we also find that whatever we're doing, we can do better. We perform better. We, as a consequence, often the progress of our work goes better, the progress of our career, our creative energy, our intuition. All of it is undercut by the thought of later, later. This isn't it, later, later. But it also gives us great power when we're able to be at peace with what is. And so this begins to expand into much bigger areas of self-understanding and of right living. This is how all these 52 qualities together become a roadmap for right living. And impatience and restlessness with the job at hand is one of those things that every day undermines our happiness. And as soon as we have the courage simply to face into what is, give our full energy to it, and then move on to what comes next, the happier we'll be in ways that you can't even begin to imagine. So, God bless you, my friends.